Welcome to episode 3 of the Campus Salt Show. We have Ben Rosenblatt here from the Radiologic Technology program. So, Ben, what does a radiologic technologist do exactly?
In the imaging field, you have your physicians that the patient is seeing, and they're going to, check to see if something is wrong. In order to do that, they refer the patient to a location where they can get the imaging done. Radiologists, the other doctor, they're ultimately the ones that are going to look at those images and interpret them. Right. But then someone needs to actually take those images, and that's where the radiologic technologist comes in. So what I'm doing in the program is basically learning how to take X-ray images of patients.
Okay. And what is there a single machine or a variety that you operate?
Oh, yeah. Interesting thing in medical imaging, you have lots of different varieties. You've got your conventional X-rays, which most common, the most cost efficient, I would say. Mm-hmm. But they give a good deal of information. Other modalities would include CT scans. Mm-hmm. You have your MRI, and then there's like specifically mammography. Right. And the like. And but for me personally, going into X-ray, that's the first step. Right. And then after that, to go into the more advanced imaging, just some more training.
Okay. Yeah. For our listeners or viewers who might be interested, what are some indications that you think someone might enjoy this career?
I think absolutely the main thing, if you're considering a career in any of the allied health professions, mm-hmm. You need to have an interest in the patient as a human being. It's true that when you go into, one of the allied health professions, it can be good money. Mm-hmm. But if you're in there just for the money and you don't particularly like dealing with people and you don't have an empathy for them, you're going to be miserable. So number one, are you interested in people? Are you empathetic with people? That would be the number one thing. Number two, specifically for X-ray imaging, there's a good deal of critical thinking involved. Mm-hmm. You can't just learn from the book and expect the book to provide the answer for every patient, because every single patient is going to be different. You could do the same exam. You could perform the same exam 10 times in a day. And each time that same exam will actually be different just because of how the patient is. So you have to use your, good deal of critical thinking to see how can you adapt this exam to each specific patient. And finally, you have to have a good eye for detail, because you're going to look at these images before you send them to the radiologist. Or the ordering physician. And on the fly, you have to decide in about 10 seconds whether or not the image is good enough. And it takes a good deal of training to really recognize those details. So ultimately, empathy for the patient, critical thinking, and attention to detail. I think those would be 3 things that would make a good candidate for X-ray.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of changing an exam for a patient?
Absolutely. For the standard chest exam, those get ordered a lot because, especially during the pandemic, because of COVID, doctors want to see the condition of the lungs. So chests are one of the most commonly ordered exams. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a chest on a healthy 20 to 30-year-old, you just stand them right up to the board and you point and shoot. Mm-hmm. It's pretty easy. But then you might have to do a chest exam on an infant. Well, then you're going to, if the infant is, combative, you might need to have the parent in there, and you're going to be doing it tabletop. So the infant's laying down, and someone has to hold the infant in place. Mm-hmm. Then if you're dealing with a geriatric case, let's say it's someone who's unable to stand, even for a brief amount of time, or someone who has mental difficulties, maybe Alzheimer's. Right. You're probably going to have to do the chest exam with them sitting in a wheelchair. And with the wheelchair, that can show up on the image as well. So you have to make sure that you're using other pieces of equipment. You have to change the exam because they're not going to be up against the wall. You have to use a mobile sort of image receiving device.
Right.
So those would be three big ways. Then you've got general age, body thickness, and other mobility issues. There's lots of ways that a chest exam can change, and that's just one of hundreds. So.
Yeah. What career path were you on before this?
Before this, I was a piano teacher. I've loved music ever since I was a child, and I've really enjoyed teaching music, especially to children.
Yeah. What led you to make a change?
When I finished school at Western, I ended up teaching in a studio setting. The owner of the studio had approached me, and they offered what seemed to be a very good deal. They said that they would recruit all the students for me, and they would take care of the entire business side. And so all I would have to worry about is the teaching. Unfortunately, it didn't end up being the case. I did have to focus a bit on the business side. Right. And ultimately, the individual ended up exploiting my work. They changed the contract several times without my consent, really. But I had no option but to go along with it. So I was left feeling very stressed and unhappy.
Right.
I wasn't making enough money. And all of this was sort of affecting my work teaching, and the students were not getting the quality that they deserved. So this led me to the conclusion that I had to really change careers. For Xray in particular, my dad is a retired doctor. My uncle is currently a doctor, and my brother, he works as a tech as well, with not in Xray, but a different area. But what he did say to me was, if he were to do it over again, he would choose Xray as the path to go.
Why is that?
Well, with Xray, the money is pretty good. But even more importantly is the variety in Xray. In Xray, you could be working in just a small sort of urgent care clinic or an outpatient clinic. You could be doing orthopedics. You could be working at maybe a small rural hospital or a large level 1 trauma hospital. If you want a slow pace, it's there. Slow pace with other coworkers, you can certainly find that. Or if you want really fast, high pressure cases, that is also available. Or even if you want to work on your own and actually do mobile Xray to various people's houses, that's there. The point being, there's something for everyone in Xray. And then if you want to even go further into the other advanced modalities, MRI, CT, etc., you can do that as well.
Cool. So before your life got busy with school and the career change, what kind of hobbies did you pursue?
Well, it's been a while, but I used to be an avid rower. I rowed competitively all through high school and college. I was recruited to Gonzaga University. I've enjoyed rock climbing a bit. I like reading. Video games I don't have time for anymore. But even before I got busy, I was busy. It seems like with the birth of my daughter, my hobbies and interests started to align with taking care of her. So we've done a lot of hiking, walking in the parks. We like to bike around, and then those are sort of the hobbies I enjoy now.
Yeah. As a classically trained pianist, I'm just curious, do you enjoy popular music?
It's a good question. When I was growing up, my parents were maybe a little bit elitist when it came to music. To put it simply, I was sort of raised to believe that classical music was superior to all the other forms of music. And if we're going to be specific, Western European art music. Right. So, but as I got older, especially in the last 10 years, I'd say, I've come to realize that there really is something of value in other forms of music. Pop, hip-hop, rock, jazz. There's brilliance in all of those areas. So I do enjoy other forms of music today. Just as there's good pop music and bad pop music, there's also good classical music and really bad classical music.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. There's classical music that makes us snore. So, yeah, I enjoy other forms of music.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to perform some of your favorite songs or pieces?
Yeah. Sometimes what I like to do is I'll take the easier music and I'll just sort of play through without thinking. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like being one with the instrument and not having to worry about it. Some of my favorite pieces are quite complex, though. Mm-hmm. I can't resist the big Rachmaninoff pieces or Beethoven. And in those cases, I may spend 5, 10, 30 minutes on a single passage, and I'll play it over and over to try and get it right. And the satisfaction is not so much from just playing through without thinking, but in finally accomplishing it, in solving the problem involved. And when I finally get it, I enjoy it.
Yeah. Since this is a Christian show, could you tell us a little bit about your faith background, growing up, what your parents believed?
Mm-hmm. My mother was raised Catholic, mm-hmm. and my father was raised Jewish. My brother and I, we were essentially raised with no religion. Mm-hmm. I can't say exactly why, but I suspect it has a little bit to do with my parents' experiences with religion as they were being raised. Yeah. For my mom, she was born out of wedlock, mm-hmm. and was given up for adoption at birth. She never met her biological father. It was sort of kept a secret from her. Right. Even when she asked many years later, they wouldn't tell her. Yeah. And later on, she divorced from her first marriage. Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church essentially rejected her, mm-hmm. and she was cast out. For my father, he was, he went to synagogue. He had his bar mitzvah. His father was sort of a hard man. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how that would have impacted my father's experience with religion, but in the end, he ended up not following the religion very much. Mm-hmm. My uncle still does, but my father's not practicing. Mm-hmm. And in the end, my brother and I simply were not raised with religion in our lives. Yeah. Really, come to think of it, we viewed religion negatively, mm-hmm. or at least I did. I think one positive aspect would have been I used to, when I'd sleep over at my friend's house and he was Catholic, we'd go to Mass the next mm-hmm. morning. And I found that to be a somewhat pleasant experience. It was enjoyable to just be in that social setting for me. Mm-hmm. Many years later, when I went to Gonzaga University, which was interesting, I have my Jewish background and going to a Catholic university. Yeah. I studied the Bible extensively from an academic perspective, mm-hmm. but I'd never read the Bible before that. And it was not what I was expecting. Mm-hmm. I found it to be full of wonderful stories, lots of admirable teachings, lots of confusing things to me as well. Mm-hmm. But it changed my perspective on Christianity in particular. One class that I very much appreciated was the Christian diversity class, where I attended services from different denominations, Greek Orthodox, Pentecostal, Southern Baptist. I saw a number of different services, each one different and And it really did change my perspective on things.
Yeah.
So
Would you mind sharing what you believe currently?
I'm not an atheist. I don't know if I would even call myself agnostic. I think I lean towards the idea that there is some higher power or organization. I don't have faith in a single being who's interested in interceding on humanity's behalf. Rather, I think I believe in something that's a little bit more beyond comprehension. It's so complex. I think I can't really put it into words.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. For the signature question of the show, what is it that convinces you personally to believe what you believe?
I think just looking at how absolutely enormous the universe is,
Yes.
and how small we are in that universe, I suppose I find it a little bit hard to believe that only we would be singled out as some special creation. I think that there's a lot to admire about us as humans. But rather than seeing us as masters over other parts of creation, I think that we're more interconnected in that regard. But I also don't think it's random, you know. I wouldn't be surprised if we all fit into some sort of greater plan. So I suppose it's a little bit of lack of faith, but also a little bit of logic, but then a little bit of faith that there is some greater power out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been fun having you on the show, Ben.
Thank you for having me. This was enjoyable.
Yeah. Welcome to the Understanding Jesus segment of the Campus Salt Show, where we open a window into the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, in the last episode, we saw Jesus presented as the promised Messiah of Israel's prophets in the introduction to the Gospel according to Mark. We saw he was introduced by a messenger, John the Baptist. He was possessed by the Spirit of God, and for 40 days in the wilderness was tempted and proved victorious over Satan. In this episode, we get to dive into the details of Jesus' ministry. This starts in the second half of Mark chapter 1. John the Baptist's ministry has come to an end since he's been arrested. That doesn't bode well for Jesus, but we'll get more into that a little bit later in Mark. Jesus begins his ministry in Galilee, which is a rural area in the north of Israel, dotted with small towns. His message in verse 14 is startling. He says, "The prophesied times have come. God's kingdom is here. Repent," meaning turn away from your sin, "and believe the good news." Now, what exactly this good news isn't clear yet, but it'll be fleshed out as Jesus begins his ministry. The first thing that Jesus does in verse 16 is call 4 fishermen to become his followers. We know from other accounts that they had already met Jesus, but Mark starts his account here in order to powerfully demonstrate Jesus' call and dramatically introduce the characters. First, we have the tan and brawny fisherman Peter. There isn't a word about his father, so it's quite likely that he's already the head of his household, because life expectancy is short in these days. And his younger brother Andrew is with him. They're on a boat, throwing a net into a lake. Jesus gets their attention, says, "Follow me." And they do. Coming to another boat, he does the same thing with James and John, 2 other brothers who leave their father Zebedee in the boat, leave their family business, and become followers of Jesus. And Jesus sees a parallel between their work, lowering nets into the lake in order to catch fish, and his own work, announcing God's kingdom in order to catch people. He promises to train them and turn them into fishers of men. In verse 21, they travel along the shore of the lake until they come to the town of Capernaum. Now, it's Saturday, the Jewish day of rest called the Sabbath. They go into the Jewish house of worship, a synagogue, and typically a synagogue service would start with a recitation of the Shema, Israel's confession of faith, followed by one of their prayers, such as the Amidah, and then a reading of Israel's scriptures. Then the floor would be open for anyone qualified to address the people. This time, Jesus takes the floor, and he begins to teach, but in a way very different from what they're used to. Jesus teaches with authority, as if he is the one in charge. In response, a demon-possessed man yells at him, "Leave us alone, Jesus of Nazareth. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Here, Jesus does not want his identity to be revealed, not at this stage, and certainly not from the mouth of a demon. So he silences the demon with a command that's probably best translated as, "Shut up." This silences the demon immediately, and he casts the demon out with the command, "Come out of him." The demon convulses the man and comes out with a shriek. The people are left in awe. They're amazed because Jesus not only teaches with authority, but he demonstrates that authority. This begins the grassroots popularity of Jesus, as the people who are present start spreading the story around, telling their friends and relatives what they saw. Leaving the synagogue in verse 29, Jesus takes his 4 new disciples and goes with them to Peter's house, where they find Peter's mother-in-law sick with a fever. She'd stayed home from synagogue. Jesus raises her up by the hand, and the fever leaves her, and she begins to wait on them as a hostess. Now, this word that's used of the fever leaving her is the exact same word that was used of the demon leaving the man in the story before. I think we're intended to see the similarities here, that Jesus has authority not only over demons, but also over sickness. Now, as soon as the sun sets, in verse 32, while the afterglow of the sunset still radiates from the horizon, people start crowding around the house. The reason for this is because in Jewish culture, the day ended not at midnight, but at the sunset. And as soon as the sun has set, it's no longer the Sabbath where the people weren't allowed to do any work. So now they're able to carry all the people who are sick and demon-possessed to his doorstep. And as all these people are here, Jesus begins healing many who are sick and who are demon-possessed. Now, the next morning, in verse 35, sometime quite early, probably between 3 and 5 a.m., Jesus sneaks out of the house. He walks to a deserted place where he prays. After a long search, later in the day, Peter and the others finally find him, and they tell him, "Everyone's looking for you." But Jesus, especially after these hours of prayer, he knows exactly what his calling is, and it's not to stay in Capernaum and enjoy his popularity or boost it further. So he says that it's time to go. It's time to preach in the surrounding villages instead of staying there. So that's what he does. He starts going throughout all the towns in Galilee, making a wide circuit, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Now, during this circuit of the Galilean towns, in verse 40, a leper comes up to Jesus, falls on his knees, and asks for help. He says, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Now, Jesus gets angry about this, and it's not totally clear why, but my best guess is because the man's attitude was more like, "If you wanted to, you could cleanse me." Meaning, he didn't believe that Jesus actually wanted to. And he should have known. Jesus' reputation had preceded him, not only in being someone who's very powerful at casting out demons and healing sicknesses, but also as someone who has tremendous compassion and who gives indiscriminately, healing everyone, casting demons out of everyone. So the man should have known. And yet, he'd been snubbed all his life. He was basically excommunicated from civilization because of his disease. And so he has this attitude. But even though Jesus is angry, he stretches out his hand and touches the man and says, "I am willing, be clean." And so he loves the man in spite of his attitude and heals him. And the leprosy, of course, leaves him at once, and he's clean. Now, Jesus immediately sends the man away in verse 43 with a very strong warning. He says, "See to it that you tell nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests and offer an offering in the temple as Moses commanded as a testimony to them." So, just like before, Jesus doesn't want the word to get out, especially about this, because healing somebody with leprosy in this day, it was like raising someone from the dead. And so Jesus does not want the word to get out, but he does want to send a warning or a testimony forward to the temple in Jerusalem, to the priests there, saying, hey, somebody out in the backwoods of Galilee is doing things that are practically unheard of, healing people from leprosy. But of course, as the man goes out in verse 45, he completely blows off what Jesus said. He starts telling everybody what happened. And as a result, there's just too much popularity, crushing popularity. Jesus can't even go into a town publicly. He's got to stay out in the wilderness. And even there, people are just streaming to him from everywhere. That wraps up the first section of Jesus' Galilean ministry. We've seen him announce the coming of the kingdom of God and actually embody that coming. We've seen him speak with authority, and we've seen that authority come out in his actions as well. He is able to cast out demons, heal diseases, and cleanse the land of Galilee. We've also seen his compassion, not only on the leper touching him, but also touching and raising up Peter's mother-in-law, and just the way that he heals indiscriminately, and he's not after his popularity in Capernaum, but is trying to spread the word across the entire region and bring healing and health. This is kind of like the honeymoon period of Jesus' ministry. We'll see in the next episode the opposition start to heat up as some of the other religious people in Israel are envious of him, and they start to take offense at some of the controversial things that Jesus is saying and doing. Well, that concludes the third episode of the Campus Salt Show. This show is brought to you by Campus Salt Christian Fellowship. We have 3 mentors, if you're a student at Bellingham Technical College, who would love to meet with you, especially if you're interested in learning more about following Jesus, or if you're struggling in your faith. These are Claudia Manelli, Jeff Grothy, and myself, Peter Rust. Also, if you're interested in being on the show, being interviewed, please let me know. We would love to have you on. You can email me at director@btcsalt.org. Or if you're interested in being involved in the ministry in other ways, please shoot me an email. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. We hope to see you on the next episode of the Campus Salt Show.